Hello and welcome to episode 17. I'm your host, Joe Ferraro. Hello and welcome to 1% Better. You're in the right place for self-improvement, personal development, and growth. Today, a tremendous guest, Brian Kight of the Focus 3 podcast. And we're going to get right into it. Just a few announcements here, a few thanks to give around. One of the things I want to open up and just thank Ryan Hawk. Ryan Hawk, on his recent podcast, The Learning Leader, one of the favorites of 1% Better, and Ryan was guest on episode 1 of 1% Better. He had Jeff Goins on. He's at Jeff Goins on Twitter, hopefully a future guest on 1% Better. During the last episode that Ryan had with Jeff, they spent a significant amount of airtime giving me some love, and the love they gave was just acknowledging some of the process of the friendship and mentorship between Ryan and I'd be remiss not to mention it. If you have not checked out that episode of The Learning Leader, you are missing out on a great episode, and one in which I happened to get some airtime, so it's a bonus for me. The really cool part was that it was a 1% Better listener that first told me that Ryan mentioned me on air. Marissa, shout out to you for mentioning that on my morning commute. Found out that Ryan and Jeff gave me some love on the show. Ryan was extremely generous in helping this podcast get off the ground, so I'd be remiss if I didn't mention episode 227. That's right, How to Be a Thriving Artist. And he's talking about Jeff's book, Real Artists Don't Starve. So shout out to Ryan and Jeff for making that happen. Also, very fortunate to be on episode 13 of Ahead of the Curve with Jonathan Gellner. Jonathan's become a friend. He asked some great questions, teeing me up to talk about Bronxville baseball and where I'm coaching. Finally, had a chance to sit down yesterday with John Belt of the Teaching Tunnel podcast. That episode will be available soon. What a blast John and I had talking about all things in the classroom, how that bleeds over into a podcast, and just a tremendous time with John. Can't wait to hear the final product. Other than that, though, it's time to roll. As always, reach out to me on Twitter at Ferraro on Air. Love the interaction. Get1percentbetter@gmail.com is a great place to send an email, to get a question answered. On that note, Brian Kight and I discuss culture. We discuss behavior, performance, belief, how to improve a company, how to improve a team, a classroom, how to integrate, as I mentioned last week, not work-life balance, but work-life alignment. Brian and I talk a bit about that and much, much more. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the conversation with Brian Kight. It is a treat and an honor to be joined by Brian Kight, CEO of Focus 3. Brian, good morning. How are you?
I'm well, Jill. Thank you for having me on. Good to be with you.
Oh, it means a lot, man. Your bio is pretty straightforward, but I like to ask people to kind of introduce themselves to my audience and how you'd like the audience to see you and what's your work these days.
Yeah. Like you said, my name is Brian Kight. I'm the CEO of Focus 3. We are a leadership development firm, which is, so we always that word leadership, we sometimes hesitate to use it because so many people claim to be a leadership development firm. But what we do is we build elite leaders, elite culture, and elite behavior. And if I were to put it into a single sentence, what our organization does is it helps people build the discipline they need to get what they want. And we work with businesses, schools, and athletic programs, from professional, college, high school, school districts, and then our businesses range from Fortune 100 to startups to mid-sized businesses everywhere in between. And we build the simple physics of what makes elite leadership, elite culture, and elite behavior. How do those three things help you execute what you need to execute to produce what it is that you need to produce? And it's put us in a great position to be able to help a lot of people in a lot of different arenas, because the things that drive success, say on a football field, at a foundational level are not fundamentally different than the things that drive success in an insurance organization or in a bank. And so I've been very fortunate to have been doing this for the last 13 years. I grew up in San Diego and Los Angeles, played college football in Ohio. So I did the opposite track. Most people do the Ohio to California. I did the California to Ohio, played college football there, and fell in love with coaching coaches. Initially trying to do that and found out right away that coaches sometimes don't want to be coached. So I actually started working with my dad, who founded our business 30 years ago. And I learned to fall in love with the business side. I fell in love with helping organizations and teams outside of athletics. Worked for 10 years before we got our first athletic client, which was Ohio State and Urban Meyer, about 4 or 5 years ago. And from that point forward, and our business had taken off long before that, and we'd worked with some amazing organizations. And but when you work with an athletic program, it's just people engage with it differently. And so that was something that was a very exciting time. Still is. We still work with them frequently, and that really vaulted us into the athletic side. So I tell people it only took me 10 years to get my first athletic client after working on it for thinking that was where I was going to start. It was a decade later where we got into athletics.
The 10-year.
So now we have the intersection.
Yeah, the 10-year overnight success. I love that. It's exactly. Brian Kight, Kight, important there when you're researching online. So many good things to dive into, and I love how you said some coaches don't like to be coached. That's the dichotomy of podcasting, because if you're listening to this right now, most likely you are someone who wants to be coached. And I'm going to do my best real estate kind of negotiation here and come out with my best and final offer right off the top, Brian, so that if this tape gets destroyed, we get this question under our belt. And I'm going to ask you a 4-dimensional question. I want to ask you, what does an elite culture look like? What does it smell like? What does it sound like?
That's a great way to ask it. And let me take that and let's keep it dimensional like that. Let's adjust the actual questions. Let's say this: what does it look like? What does it sound like? And what's it feel like? So if I were to step into your program, if I were to step into your business, how about this? I had a client tell me this the other day. If I were to step into your home with your family, what would I see? What would I feel? And what would I hear from you? And that is a relevant question, because people do that every day. They see things, they feel things, and they hear things. When I start with a client, and I get into the answer here, but when I start with a client, and you can think of this when you go to a doctor's office, when you step into a hospital, when you go visit a client site, you can feel the culture in the environment. Joe, have you ever been to somebody else's house? And maybe you had dinner over there, or you went over for a barbecue, or it was a get together, and you got over to the house, and all of a sudden somebody started talking in a certain way, or the family started interacting and it had a certain dynamic, and it wasn't the standard that you have. There was kind of that tension, awkwardness in the air, and you're like, whoa, this is how you guys do things? Yes. You ever had that experience?
Yes.
Yeah. And it's not like nobody laid out like, hey, this is our family culture, and the difference is your family culture is this and our family culture is that. No, you just feel it. You see it. You hear them say something and you say to yourself, I would never talk to my wife that way, or I would never talk to my husband that way, or I would never do that with my kids in front of other people. And there's just that difference between you two people. And that's not even judgment. It's just, you can just feel the difference.
No, it's journalism. It's journalism. You're reporting what you see.
That's exactly right. So elite cultures know what it needs to look like, feel like, and sound like. And here's the difference. They know what it needs to look like, feel like, and sound like in order to execute the things required to win. The big difference between how 99% of culture is taught and how culture actually needs to work is that culture's job is not to make people feel good. Culture has one job, and that is to drive behavior that wins, period. That's the end of the story. Everything after that in culture is a byproduct that if it shows up, phenomenal. But if not, culture's already done its job. Culture exists to get people to do the things required by your strategy, or to win, or to beat your competitor, or to build the character in the young person, whatever it happens to be. If your culture disengages people from difficult behavior, well, then your culture is holding you back from doing what's required to win. So elite cultures, you're in an elite culture when it requires you to do everything necessary to win according to your standards. And I want to right away, let me just make sure this is clear, and I'll pause. Winning is not just the cutthroat win or lose, win at all costs. When I say win, I mean win by whatever standards you choose to apply. Winning in a family is one thing. Winning in athletics has both a scoreboard element as well as a character driving element. Winning in business is about delivering good to the world, as well as making some money, as well as sustaining the business model, as well as treating your employees the right way so that they have a place to work and build their lives around and their families are secure. So winning is not a singular threshold. It's a multivariable thing. However, there are things required to do in order to win. If you're not doing them, then your culture isn't supporting them. And it's just easier to build a strategy than it is to build that kind of a culture. Is that, you follow that?
I follow it. I take notes in it and I process it. And this is the first moment of the podcast where you may need to hit pause and think about that. You may need to hit the 30-second button and go back a couple of moments, because that's the money's worth moment, but we got to keep over delivering. So I'm off and running, and I love it. Now, you said that the elite cultures understand what it takes to win. You said a lot more than that. Now, if I were to go in a different direction and say to you now, they see what it takes, and you and Tim and your team, you see what it takes. You've been able to see other cultures. You've been able to have those feels. So what is on your Mount Rushmore, the Focus 3 Mount Rushmore, of what strategies or tools or systems? What's the Mount Rushmore look like for you guys and your team as you go in and help teams get to that place?
You mean how are we teaching people to actually win? What is it that we teach on that?
Yeah, because when I looked into your work, there's so many different tools, and I love it. But we can't possibly cover all 40, all tools. Well, there may be 40, but let's not cover them all in 40 minutes. Let's set that framework up. What are 4 or 3 that you just can't live without? People have to know that you deeply believe in the following.
Yeah. So the underpinning, as I talk about in culture, knowing what it takes to win and what's it look like, feel like, and sound like. The first thing is to understand it doesn't have to look, feel, or sound like anyone or anything else. So I think sometimes people, before we even get into the tools, I think sometimes people hear that, or they read a book, or they see Jeff Bezos talking about something, or Steve Jobs. They start idolizing some other leader, some other business. And what they do is they try to make their business reflect what they think is supposed to be done. So what I would tell everybody is, don't make your business or your culture what somebody else says is good. You need to do the work of figuring out, what does our culture need to look like, feel like, and sound like to do the things we need to do. And don't use any other business as a reference point. Just use your strategy and the things you need people to do as a reference point, and build that kind of a culture. So that's number one.
Well, let me jump in there, because that's a beautiful chance to clarify. So I love the way you said that. So if we're thinking of the big programs, the programs that are on television all the time, we feel as though, even though we don't, we feel as though we have a taste of what their culture's like from the television. That's hard to do.
Right.
You're saying very clearly, do not imitate that. Nope. But you also hear the message in our popular culture that says success leaves clues. So how do we fight that tension?
Structure and systems. So what I always tell people, and this is what folds us into the tools, and why we're so successful as a business, and why people at the highest levels, why do the Urban Meyers and Chris Petersons and of the world, at least on the college football side, why do Fortune 100 organizations reach out to us? Not because we're telling one company how to build a culture like another company, but because our systems allow them to unlock things that they've never been able to unlock inside their business before. Urban Meyer won 2 national championships before we ever met him. So he already knew how to coach football. He already knew how to build it. But our system and structure allowed him to enhance and improve the depth and quality to which he can lead his culture and get it into other people. And so in that way, for people who are already moving and are already having a measure of success, We're an enhancement tool. We're a clarification tool. We help systematize things that maybe to this point in your career, you've just gotten done through elbow grease and hard work and power of will or personality or charisma, which describes a lot of leaders. And now you've tried to scale up and you're finding that your culture is having trouble scaling. We help you scale it. Or maybe you're somebody who's never clarified culture, and we help you for the first time clarify it. So that's the biggest difference, is that we help systematize something that almost never gets systematized inside of a business. And we help you make it personalized so that you're not copying somebody else's culture and now you're trying to build a business on a copy of a copy. Like that just doesn't work. So when success leaves clues, it leaves structural clues, systematic clues. The phrase that I use, actually, well, I shouldn't say that. I do use it. The phrase I learned from my dad, almost probably 20 plus years ago, is physics. Okay, let's take science, and we will come back to the tools here in just a minute. But let's take science.
I was told there'd be no science, but
okay,
I've heard the word physics, and I'm actually happy you're going to unpack that.
Here's what I'll tell you. I'm not going to teach science, but we'll use science as a tool.
Love it.
So science leaves clues, success leaves clues, and when I say we, I don't know if you and I are doing the science, Joe, but when other scientists read Einstein or Edison or any of the other famous scientists, and they kind of go back over their notes or their studies, what is it that allows them to trust what Einstein had written down? What's the one commonality from Einstein's time to ours? The physics. They never changed. But if the rules of Einstein's time and the fabric of the universe was different during Einstein's time than our time, well, then we couldn't trust it, because the equation for gravity would be different and the equation for light would be different and the physics of how fast things fell would be different than Da Vinci's time. But they're not. They're the exact same. The physics never change. Now, how you apply those physics, what you learn about those physics, of course, that changes over time, and we advance those. But what allows us to advance them? What allows us to advance them is the fact that the system has never been different as long as human beings have been on planet Earth. Gravity is unchanged. Light is unchanged. Centrifugal, I'm exhausting my scientific terminology. Centrifugal force is unchanged. The same thing is true for us. So when success leaves clues, that's because emotions are emotions. Leading people is leading people. The physics are not different. Application is different in a school than on a football team. The physics are not. You have to account for emotions. You have to account for clarity. You have to account for consistency. You have to account for attitude. You have to account for how do you speak? How do you sound? How much do people trust you? They're the same physics everywhere you go. So we teach the physics, and then we, from there, help people apply those physics as relevant in their universe, in their application environment. So this week I'm out in Seattle, and so here's a great example. I'm in Seattle in the next 2 days. Football team, basketball team, baseball team, car dealership. No differences. Not in the physics. Application across those environments completely different. One has to sell. 3 of them don't. One of the teams has 100 people. The other one has 15. One has 12 coaches and leaders and systems. The other has 4. 2 of them are super interactive team sports, constant pace. The other, a lot of waiting in between. But the application is going to be different across the board with the same underlying physics. And that's what our tools allow us to do. I think that's an important level setting before we talk about any of the tools or the Mount Rushmore as you laid it out, is that's what is so fun about, for me, that's what's so fun about our business is I stay in the same tool, but no day is ever the same for me with a client, because it's always applying it to what's right in front of them, let alone applying it to my own life, my own family, and building our business as we grow. It's incredibly exciting.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what you're really reinforcing is the idea that when I first discovered the Focus 3 podcast, the first parallel that I drew was a college curriculum. you guys are laying out, father-son team, laying out what I would consider a curriculum on leadership, on culture, on behavior. That's how I'm reading it. So it is important. Exactly what you said is important, because you get into the tools without any kind of grounding, we lose track. But I do want to hear about a system or two that you just keep going back to. So let's use the example. You're in Seattle, and you're looking at those 4 groups, and you're drinking some great coffee. And what is a system that right now, before you speak to the car dealership and the baseball team, you're going to tell them the same system and expose them to the same system?
So the first system that every organization has to understand, and I'll use organization as the highest level description of a group of people trying to get something done. And the first system that you have to understand is called the performance pathway. And the performance pathway is the flow of where results in an organization come from. And it looks like this. You can visualize this in your head. Visualize arrows moving from left to right in a path. Leaders create the culture that drives the behavior that produces results. Now let's reverse engineer that pathway and let's systematically look at it. Going from right to left, reverse engineering, results come from behavior. Behavior comes from culture. Culture comes from leaders. So here's what the system you need to understand is in your performance environment. Results reflect behavior. If the result is not there, it's because the behavior was either not good enough or hasn't been done for long enough. Let that sink in. There is a cause and effect nature of the world. There's physics that never changes, and it doesn't matter how comfortable you or I are with that. If the result is not there, it's because you're not good enough, or because you're not doing it, or you just haven't done it long enough. Because and people sometimes struggle with that when we lay that out, because they want the result. And they want to think that the effort so far was deserving of it. But physics dictates what? When you are good enough, it will work. When you're not, it won't. We like to look for causes everywhere else. But the reality is you're either good enough or you're not. That's true for me. And you can start pointing to external things that get in your way. And that's true. You know, you ever sold in your life, Joe? You ever had to sell anything? You ever a bartender or a waiter, or you ever have to sell something?
Father's restaurant, yes.
Oh, cool, right? What kind of food?
Well, we're Italian, but Cafe Ferraro, a little, but it's breakfast, lunch, and dinner, man.
I love it. So I did the same thing growing up, and I own a restaurant out in California, so it's an easy example. So, did you ever deal with difficult customers?
Only on days that end with the letter Y.
That's right. Only on days we were open. So. Look, you can deal with difficult customers, and customers make it harder for you to deliver a great service experience and say, get tipped out well and, get them to come back. But here's the thing. Were there people who were better at dealing with difficult customers than others working in the restaurant?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And were there other people who, when they dealt with a difficult customer, they just lost, they couldn't handle their composure, like it rattled them, and the rest of their shift was done, right?
Yeah, they would say things like, what a day.
Yeah, exactly. So the point is, you have to be good enough, not in a clinical environment. You have to be good enough in the dynamic environment that we all live. You have to be good enough to overcome unexpected, difficult, unfair circumstances that present to you in life. And if you're not good enough to overcome those, and those situations test you. So you have to be good enough, and you have to have enough endurance of skill and will to overcome even the difficulties in life. And what you find systematically is that even in a business is you find that people are prepared to engage in the behavior required to win, as long as it's either not too hard, not too unfair, or we don't have to deal with too many obstacles. But as soon as in so many businesses, in so many sports, in so many schools, I'm willing to engage in the behavior required up until I feel like I'm having to deal with too many things that get in my way. And then all of a sudden I point to those things on the outside of me as to why I didn't get the results. And the reality is we don't get to do that. The physics don't let you say that. So behavior must be good enough to win. The question is, what drives behavior more than anything else in the business? Let's keep reverse engineering the pathway. Behavior doesn't come from nowhere, not in a group of people. Behavior comes from culture. If you get a group of people together, culture is a much more significant driver of what people do and why they do it than strategy is. And I'm sure you see that in the school.
Yes.
I'm sure you see that as you teach. The strategy of the school asks for one thing, but take school districts. We work with them all over the place. What's one of the biggest challenges in public education in America today, like in a lot of businesses? Resistance to change. Resistance to change. It's right there. And why? Well, we get comfortable, and then attitudes develop, and then those attitudes start to get shared between people, and then a belief system starts to set in, and that belief system may or may not really help the strategy of the school, which is, graduate kids, teach them skills, put people in positions to win. It may or may not help that. And there's a myriad list of things on the outside that educators don't control. And there's a myriad list of things that are, I'll use a really technical term here. There's a myriad list of things that are all kinds of screwed up in how we regulate public education in America today. Of course there are. But what business doesn't have that? I mean, that exists in college athletics, that exists in pro athletics, that exists in banking and insurance and accounting. There's all kinds of stuff that goes into that. You have to have a winning culture. And frankly, is this a fair statement on my part? That because those things exist that make it hard on educators, that's a reason why you need an even better culture, because the environment around you is not always putting you in the best possible position to win and do what educators need to do in America. Is that fair?
Oh, it's fair. And if it was easy, everyone would do it. It's that simple.
Yes. So culture is what drives behavior. Specifically, we define culture as three things: belief, behavior, and experience. And so where do people get, we talked earlier, what do I see? What do I feel? What do I hear? Where does that come from? Well, it comes from the experience you deliver. And experience is those threads. That's what experience is. Experience is something that's seen, felt, and heard. And where does that come from? Well, it comes from how you behave according to what you actually believe. So why does culture drive behavior that produces results? Well, because culture is all about what do you believe, how do you behave, and what's the experience that creates for other people. Behavior in a group of people is much more driven by that than by whatever strategy was designed by a superintendent or a coach or a middle manager. People are going to pay attention to the culture more than anything else. And I use a great example that people immediately identify with and let's take your school or your business or your restaurant for that matter. If you guys decided to hire me because in any of those environments, and you decided to hire me because you thought I had pretty good technical skill for the work and you thought I had a really great attitude, but the team that I joined was cynical and negative and resistant, and they weren't bad people. They just didn't have great attitudes, and they were more cynicism, and they talked more about people rather than to people. After 1 year of me working with that team of people, what's more likely? That I will have made all of them better, or they will have gotten me to come to their level? What's more likely?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's the sink to the level of the environment.
There you go. And that's culture. And when you think about that rationally, that means that after 1 year of working with that group, I will get worse rather than me get them better or me just stay where I'm at. It's much more likely that I drift down to their level. Not because the strategy asks for it, not because it works, not because I make so much more money when I act that way, but because why? The experience of working with them is so strong that I just start matching their attitudes, their energy levels, their belief systems, and I absorb what the group believes rather than stand secure in my belief and try to raise them to a higher standard. Most people just aren't equipped to do that.
Well,
and then culture comes where people believe, how they behave, and the experience that they deliver to each other. It must be led. You have to lead what we believe in our business. You have to declare. You got to pick. You can't let people absorb beliefs. You can't let people situationally apply teamwork. I always tell people, you look at a list of values of what people believe in their culture. First of all, it's the same list in almost every single company, which means it's not even remotely unique to you. Number two is people don't foundationally believe in those. They situationally believe in them. And the easiest ones are teamwork and honesty. How many people believe in teamwork? Every hand in the room goes up, right?
Yeah.
Every hand in the room goes up. Until somebody disagrees with your idea, then you believe in a dictatorship. How many of you believe in teamwork? Every hand goes up. Until you're the one sacrificing the resources to give to somebody else and your work gets harder because resources you used to have now gone to a different part of the organization. Everybody believes in teamwork until you're the one who doesn't get the commission and the credit.
So the move,
yeah,
good. I was going to ask you. So the strategic move then, as a leader, as you're building your as you're building your culture on that exact moment, would you then say, do not choose teamwork as one of your values? Is that the move?
No, I would say choose teamwork if and only if you are going to actually drive all of your behavior through that lens, foundationally. You can't situationally apply it. It has to be a foundational application. Honesty is another one that goes up there all the time. People say honesty. And then they're like, do you believe in honesty? And I sure do. I tease them, but I also like really challenge them. I say, no, you do not. You don't believe in honesty. You believe in selective honesty. You believe in being honest with people as long as it doesn't make it too uncomfortable to be honest with you. Because as soon as I have to tell you a really hard truth and it hurts your feelings, or you get mad at me, or you don't like me because I told you something, or there's a little tension, you don't tell the truth. Not because you're a bad person, but because, of course, it's normal to like not want to necessarily say something that might hurt somebody else's feelings. But what I want to tell businesses is stop putting values into your business that you're not going to actually live and clarify and teach and demand and hold people accountable for. Put values into your businesses and put values into your schools that you're going to live by. Put them into your school that you're going to hire and fire by. Put them into your school as to what you are going to celebrate for and what you're going to challenge people when they don't do it. If that's honesty or teamwork, by all means, go and put it in there. Just make sure that you are ready to do the work required to make that the unyielding standard of how we do everything inside of our organization. That's a very different standard than how most people do culture. Do you see that? Do you share that experience with me, or do you see that differently?
Well, I share a lot of what you're saying, and it's just great stuff. And what I want to ask about in that moment, though, is I'm imagining when you're working with clients or teams or organizations, what it seems to be that you're saying then is that there's a great deal of thought that you are going to ask them to do, some soul searching, some reflection, some pausing, because we can't get organizations to get to that strategic level if they really haven't chose those standards where they're going to be unyielding. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
I don't want it to do. I don't want to ask them to do it once. I want to ask them to do it every day.
Every day. Now, what does that look like? What does it look like when you ask a leader to do that every day? What's the practice?
Well, I want to ask everyone to do it every day. Not just leaders. I mean, if you at your school or in my company, it's not me doing it every day. Frankly, the least amount of power is if a leader does it every day. The most power and where culture lives in the belief, behavior, and experience of the staff, because they're by far the largest source of culture and sharers of culture in any organization.
Okay, so Zach is there. He's on the team. He's in the classroom. What are you asking him to do?
So what I'm asking him to do is I'm asking him, and this goes into the system, right? So culture drives behavior. And if you want culture to drive behavior and you want people to be good at it, you got to teach them a system for behavior. I'm asking him to be disciplined about living our culture, which is where I come back to, the core of what we do. If it was a single word, is we sell discipline. It's discipline in leadership, culture, and behavior. And if we were to put it in a single sentence, it's the discipline you need to get what you want. Well, if you want a great culture, then people have to be disciplined about living it. Living a culture comes down to a simple equation. Event plus response equals outcome. And you got to teach people how to live culture. Most people first don't know what culture is. So that's why we have the conversation you and I just had about where does culture come from? What is it? What makes it up? What's ours? The second piece is, how do I do it? Okay. And you're asking the relevant question. It's Zach or Jim or Nancy or Lindsay. And she's saying, okay, I just see this culture and I hear this laid out. What do you want me to do? And here's how we help businesses and companies install a how-to on living culture. And that is teach them how to respond using our culture as the reference point for how to respond. Event plus response equals outcome. Work, life is a flow of events. The outcomes that you get are not determined by the events that you experience. They are determined by how you respond. If you want great outcomes, you must respond with discipline to every event that comes in. And what we do is we teach this system. We call it the R factor, and the R stands for response. We teach the system for how do you use your culture to guide how you respond to the circumstances you encounter in your working environment or your performance environment to go produce the outcomes that are important to you and your organization. So what I want to ask people to do, and where we not only ask, what we train people to do is if it's a Thursday morning and you're going into a client meeting and something starts to happen, I want you to press pause and I want you to think about what's our culture standard. What have we trained you on the standards for how to think, how to make decisions, what outcomes are important to us, what attitude do we have when interacting with clients, whether they're hard to work with or not? And then are you guiding your response with those standards in mind, and are you getting better at it? I had a client tell me the other day, we built a culture playbook for this client, and we were starting the process of and this was in the healthcare space. We were starting the process of training the employees to respond with the culture play. We call it a culture playbook. To respond with the culture playbook in mind as the reference point for everything they're doing, whether it was clinical or teaming or surgical or anything in between. And the CEO stood in front of the people and said, listen, and I love this. I stole this from him. He said, listen, we're going to train you how to live this culture playbook. And I don't need you to be great at everything in our culture playbook, because I know I'm not great at everything in our culture playbook. But here's what I do need you to do. I need you to make progress in how good you are at everything in this culture playbook. You don't have to be great yet, but I need you to make progress. If I see you not making progress at, and I'll pick one of theirs, right? One of theirs is lead with your heart, or win with your heart. That was one of his behaviors. Win with your heart. He says some of you don't really tap into emotions particularly well, which is a really normal thing. Some of you say win with your heart and you think it's fuzzy and foo-foo, but it's really important. I don't need you to be great at that today, but here's the thing. In 1 year, I need you to be better. You can't ignore it. And so he uses E plus R equals O to put his people into training scenarios and situations, and as a reflective tool to go back and say, all right, let's apply win with your heart as the reference point for what needed to be part of your response in this particular situation. And then he uses that as a teaching framework and a teaching tool. And so we have this system called the R factor that revolves around E plus R equals O, and it teaches people the skills of how to respond. And it has 6 components. I'll lay these 6 out and let you take it from where you want. And I don't think we've even talked about this in the podcast, so this is probably not something that you've heard before beyond the disciplines. The disciplines for how to respond are these: press pause, get your mind right, and step up. Then you adjust and adapt, make a difference, and build skill. Those are the 6 things that guide every response. And here's what those 6 things are. I talked about the timelessness of this. If you look at pause, get your mind right, step up, adjust and adapt, make a difference, build skill. Here's what those 6 things are, Joe. Think, feel, act, change, team, and learn. That's all they are. What we teach people to do in the system is, if you want to be great at anything, you want to be a great husband, you want to be a great wife, you want to be a great boyfriend, girlfriend, you want to be a great dad, you want to be a great salesperson, there's 6 things you've got to do with discipline, and they're non-negotiable because you're already doing them. You just need a better system for it. And that is, you got to think, feel, act, change, team, and learn with discipline. To the extent you step away from those 6 and you start to lack discipline in one of them, results are going to suffer.
Wow. This is a great moment as a podcast host because anyone who's closely listening, like I expect our audience to do, is saying, oh, I hope he goes here next. I hope he goes there next. And you know what? That's why you start a podcast, because I get to choose where to go next. And my goal in this interview was I don't want to say the phrase, I think it's a lazy phrase when people say we barely scratched the surface. That's exactly what I want to do. I want to scratch. I want to scratch the surface. I want to bubble this up. I want to send people to focus3.com, and I want to get the conversation rolling. There's so many different places to go, and with that is opportunity. So there's a word I'll throw in and kind of piggybacks on what you said, and it's transfer. And what I mean by that is it seems to be the point of education in some regards, point of business, which is inside our culture, the environment that you have now laid out for us. It works. Where we're there, it's working great. In this classroom, in this boardroom, on the customer floor. But when I leave that, sometimes I'm not exhibiting the hallmarks of the culture that I just left. Have you seen that? And what are you seeing standing in the way of transferring those skills?
You mean when let's take let's say I work for a company. I work for ABC company, and I want to make sure I understand what you're asking. So if I work for ABC company and there's a certain culture standard, and we're working to apply that culture standard, but then it's at the end of the day on Tuesday, 5:00, I go home, and then I don't transfer the principles to my personal life, or I don't transfer
a little bit of that. And maybe a better way to look at it, and for me to ask a better question, is let's use a soccer team. So while I'm there on this team, it's flowing. I'm bought into the culture. It appears yada yada yada. Now I go to play in my academy team in the summer, and my habits, my behaviors look completely different.
Yeah. So I don't talk a whole lot about this. In fact, it's not even something that we teach in our sessions or a part of our work. But I'll just tell you what I believe, and that is, I believe in total life alignment. That's the value of a system, Joe, is when you have a system, is that it's not selective application. It's strategic application. Now, I'm not exactly the same in terms of how I speak and how I talk when I'm on stage delivering a keynote versus how I am when I'm at home on a Saturday night with my wife and 1-year-old son, right? So there's personality that flows in there. This is not about being robotic in any way. But what I will tell you is when you start aligning your life with a standard and you start living your life according to lines you've drawn on who you want to be, I think everything gets better. I think one of the worst phrases that found its way into popular society is work-life balance. I think it's one of the worst phrases to ever hit pop culture and pop science because it's just not true. Work-life balance as a statement and as a practice posits and makes it feel like somehow your work and your life are two different things, when the reality is your work is your life. You don't have separate places. You go places, but you're one person. You have one head, you have one heart, and you use them one day at a time. To think that in some fashion, when I'm at work, I'm one person, and when I'm at home, I'm a different person, like that's neurosis. Yeah. You're the same person, man.
Let's coin a phrase together. Work-life alignment. Work-life symmetry.
Yes.
Not balance, work-life alignment, perhaps.
And also even the phrase work-life balance makes it feel like it's some kind of zero-sum game. It's like it's a zero-sum game, like one has to take away from the other. When the reality is I want to shake people, and I'm going to wake them up and say, you spend more hours working than any other activity in the world. It is your life. That doesn't mean that you are your job. Okay, I'm not my job. I love my job. And a little sidebar, the word vocation comes from a Latin word vocare, which means a calling. So a vocation is not just a job. A vocation was a calling, something to which you were called. I know that not everybody feels that way about their work. I do. I believe that it's a calling for me. So when I wake up in the morning and I'm spending my day and I'm, here on this podcast with you, or I'm with a client, or I'm building something or writing something or leading my team, I'm not doing a job. I'm living the calling of my life.
Oh man.
That's what I do. That's what I do every single day.
That's strong. I really appreciate you sharing something that's in your heart and not necessarily something you teach. That's a podcaster's dream for sure, a curious person's dream. So many places to go, but I want to throw a word at you and just let you have at it. You have no problem with something like that, I can tell. Trust. If I say the word trust to you, where do you go with that?
Well, immediately I go to a structure, a system, because as a word, it's used so often. So few people have a system. We're systems. I'm a systems thinker. We're a systems company. So the first thing I think of is, what is trust? Trust is character, competence, and connection. It's a combination. So when you're thinking of trust, there's three ways people have to trust you. People have to trust your character, they have to trust your competence, and they have to trust your connection. It's not about what you think you have. It's about what other people experience on those three. Second thing I think of in trust is that it is earned through the quality of the experience you deliver, not granted by whatever title or position you think you have. A lot of people want the title, but not the job that comes with it. And a trust is not something that, and I'll use myself as an example. I've been doing this for 13 years. I think I'm pretty competent. I think I know what I'm talking about. These are all I'm telling all the opinions I have of myself. I've worked with some really big name clients. We've had a ton of success and gotten a lot of press and all kinds of cool things. When I'm on stage, nobody cares. When I'm talking, nobody cares. They are not referencing their trust in me based on what I've done 13 years, because they don't know 99.999% of the experiences I've had over my 13 years. I do. They're measuring me on trust based on how valuable I am to them. And frankly, my title is actually a CEO or, advisor of businesses, whatever these phrases are that people use. They're actually measuring me and saying, okay, does he deserve that? That's how people look at me. And I think the same thing happens for teacher, coach, superintendent, head coach, boss, VP, whatever you want to call it, manager. There's a title, but the title doesn't earn you trust. The title sets a certain expectation for how quality you are in earning that trust. And I think a lot of people think they deserve a certain amount of trust because of, the time they've put in. And that doesn't earn trust. That just doesn't earn it. It's not a pension. You don't just build it up and then, oh, hey, I put in my time, so now you got to trust me because I've been around for a while, or I got this title. I worked really hard to get here. No, trust is on trial every day. And if you're not delivering an experience deserving of trust, well, then you won't get it. And I tell people all the time, and I'll speak it on this podcast as excuse me, I'll speak it on this podcast as well. The phrase buy-in. Leaders use this all the time. Buy-in, buy-in, buy-in. Trust me, trust me, trust me. And I tell anybody who starts going in that direction, stop asking for buy-in and stop asking for trust, and start doing things worthy of people buying into. Stop asking for trust. People will trust you when you deserve it. Start doing things deserving of trust. And that goes just as much for a romantic relationship, a marriage, partners, as it does to parents, as it does to sales, service, teaming, teaching, leading. Earn it. That's your responsibility, not other people's.
I wouldn't.
Not that I have strong opinions on any of those things.
I would not have had you on the show if I didn't think you were elite and had elite ideas. But one of the things to me, Brian, that you're world class at, you and your team, is definitions. How on earth do you guys find a complex word and simplify it to the most understandable means possible?
Three ways. One, I read old text.
Do you really?
I would say old exclusively. So this year, where this is being recorded in 2017. So this year I have not read a book less than 100 years old.
By choice.
By choice. Yeah.
A lot of authors listening just sent, the little frown right there. But go ahead.
That's all good. All right. I mean, look, I want people to read what I write, so I get it. But no, I read the old stuff because, one, the least reliable studies, so to speak, are the newest ones because they haven't been pressure tested and validated with time. Number two is if somebody found something true. I mean, I was just reading something the other day. Okay, you ready for this? Watch this. I'll pull this up. I was reading something recently. I've been sharing this with more people because I just think this is really awesome. So let me give you the three things I do. I read old text. Number one. Number two, my dad and I work really hard and we beat the hell out of each other on how to get it to a better version of, clarification. And then number three is our reference point is simple and systematic. If it's not simple and systematic, it does not meet our standard. So those are three things. I read old text so that I'm always relying on truth. I'm not getting caught in new age principles. And I read according to ways of speaking to people that have worked for thousands of years rather than trying to get caught in some catchphrase that is a buzz on Twitter, like work-life balance or employee engagement, things that don't actually mean something, but people use incessantly. Number two is my dad and I we just sparks fly when we get in there. So the end product is something that you say is really nice on the definition and simple, but the process of getting there is pretty intense.
Yeah, but then the third is I'm sorry to interrupt. Isn't that the most perfect metaphor though? That's the most perfect metaphor for what we're talking about. It's messy.
It is. It's
messy. It's confrontational at times. There's conflict, and the end result is voila.
Is better. Correct. And that's the thing, and not everybody sees that and they don't need to. And that's okay, because it's like anything else. The end product is always viewed like it got there a lot easier. And then we just use simple and systematic. But let me give you an example of why I read old text. Let me read this to you real quick. And this is really interesting because, and what grades do you teach?
I have seniors.
Okay. So you have, 17, 18-year-olds, right?
You got it.
Okay. So I'm going to read you this. And I'll kind of paraphrase for language. Some of the language is a little old, but I'll paraphrase for us. This is talking about the Roman army, okay, in the year 400. Okay? The Roman army in the year 400. Another cause of weakness in our ranks is that in the ranks, the soldiers find the duty too hard, the arms are too heavy, the rewards are too distant, and the discipline is too severe. To avoid these inconveniences, the young men enlist in the auxiliaries, where the service is less labor intense, and they have a reason to expect faster rewards.
400.
In the year 400. So I read that, okay? In the year 400, the big problem in the Roman army was that the young men that were in there didn't want to work hard, thought the discipline was too severe, thought the gear was too heavy, and said it took too long to get our rewards. Does that sound like any group of young people that you've heard of being talked about in the national conversation in America?
It does, and it sends us right back into the physics of the thing don't change.
So here's my point. When people say this is the most entitled generation in history, they don't even know what they're talking about. They've never read about previous generations. They've never read what the Roman army dealt with in the year 400, because 18-year-olds then are like 18-year-olds now. They know very little compared to you and I, because you and I have been 18 plus a number of other years. And here's what I would tell everyone listening who has anybody like 20 or younger in their life, or frankly, if you work in a business and you got people who are 27 or younger, you're dealing with that millennials. Okay. Here's what I'll tell you. I would tell you this. Number one, if you've got problems with millennials, the more likely case is that you've forgotten what it was like to be 17. The second thing is you have no idea what it was like to be 17 in 2017. Neither do I. Put an iPhone in my hands at 17 years old. I mean, I shudder. Have you ever thought about that?
No.
Have you thought about that?
I have not. Oh.
Like, what if I gave you an iPhone with Snapchat when you were 15, Joe? What would you have done?
I made some pretty good decisions, Brian. I'm not going to lie to you.
So, I mean, look, I mean, that's the thing of who knows? I don't know. I don't know what I would have done, but I know what I was like at 15 and 16 and 17, and I thought I was certainly a good kid, but I was also a teenager. I was a knucklehead. So I read that old stuff, and I'm like, okay, there's truth. The discipline is too severe. The rewards took too long. And the next line in that, by the way, was talking about how do you overcome that? And here's what it was talking about. You talked about trust earlier. The next line in that text was that it was articulating that for people who are leading in that environment, the most important skill was not strategy. The most important skill was not, great arms or how to move the army around. Here's how they phrased it. The most important skill of a general was the ability to move the human heart. And that must refresh daily. That no skill was so rare in a leader, and no skill was more important in the ranks than to be able to encourage the people to do the things they needed to do each day. The most common skill among the ranks was strategy and physical ability. The least common skill was courage and the ability to encourage daily. That's the unique skill of a leader.
Man, Brian, this is a free podcast. Process that for a second, people. This is a free podcast where you can learn this kind of thing. I mean, we're not asking for the world. I mean, take your thumb, put it in the upper right-hand corner, and maybe there's a human being you know that might dig this, that might get something out of Brian's work. I mean, am I off base here?
There's not a person that what wakes me up in the morning is that there's not a person on the planet that this can't apply to and help. And I say that from a place of service because it is extraordinary that anybody listens to what I have to say. I mean, it astonishes me that I get to do this for a living. I love it. I have a job, but I've never worked a day in my life. And our mission is, like I said, to help people get the discipline they need to get the things that they want. I don't know what it is that you want as you're listening right now. I don't know what you're trying to achieve. I don't know what goal that you're still pursuing. I don't know what dream you've given up on. I don't know what fire went out in you a couple of years ago. I don't know how you've been knocked down by your organization. I don't know how you have tried to do something, or I don't know what just engaged your heart or what just fired you up. But the mission that I and my company serve is to give you the tools and systems you need to go overcome those challenges that are in front of you, get those things that you want, build that life that you need, or grow the business or win the championship that you're trying to go after. And as long as I'm around on this earth, that's the mission that we'll continue to serve.
I love to finish the podcast with a call to action, but it cannot be topped what you just did there. So I'm going to finish the podcast by saying, share this with someone. To me, it's a 2-3 time listen, but share this with someone you might think could get something out of it. And I'm just going to end with a sincere thank you, Brian. I want to be aggressively and ruthlessly fair with your time. And I just want to say a sincere thank you.
You are welcome. I enjoyed the conversation, and I hope your audience enjoys.
He's Brian Kight, www.focus3.com. Go ahead and check out his work. We thank Brian Kight for joining us.